Nightmares are among the most intense and disturbing experiences the human mind can produce. They grip us with fear, often waking us with a pounding heart, cold sweat, and an overwhelming sense of helplessness. But what exactly is a nightmare? Why do we have them? And what might they reveal about the hidden corners of our psyche? To explore these questions, we turn to one of the most influential thinkers on the human mind, Sigmund Freud. Freud believed that dreams are the royal road to the unconscious. They are not random or meaningless, but rather deeply personal messages sent from the parts of ourselves we do not fully understand. In this framework, nightmares are not simply bad dreams. They are vital signals. They are warnings, expressions of conflict, or eruptions of repressed emotions breaking through the surface of sleep. Freud's theory of dreams is built on the idea that the unconscious mind is full of desires, fears, and memories that are too threatening or unacceptable to face directly. So instead, the mind disguises them through symbols, metaphors, and narratives that play out while we sleep. But sometimes the disguise fails. Sometimes the raw emotion breaks through. That is the nightmare. For Freud, the most basic force in the unconscious is desire, especially desires we have been taught to suppress. These desires are often tied to childhood, a period Freud believed was foundational in shaping who we become. Nightmares, then, can be viewed as the return of these forbidden or painful impulses. They are a way for the unconscious to force us to confront what we have avoided. Imagine, for example, a dream in which you are being chased. You don't know by whom or what, but you are running, terrified. This is one of the most common types of nightmares. Freud might interpret this as a manifestation of anxiety, a psychological reaction to something unresolved. The pursuer may symbolize a repressed part of the self, an unacknowledged fear, or a guilty conscience. The act of running may represent avoidance, the attempt to flee from something that demands recognition. The intensity of nightmares comes from their emotional truth. Even when the imagery is bizarre or surreal, the feeling is real. That is what makes them so powerful. Freud argued that emotions in dreams are not disguised. While symbols and characters may shift, the emotional core, fear, guilt, shame, longing, remains direct and unfiltered. This is why nightmares can shake us so deeply. They bypass the rational mind and strike at the heart. Some nightmares are rooted in trauma. Freud worked with many patients who suffered from what he called hysterical symptoms, physical or emotional pain that had no apparent cause. He discovered that many of these symptoms were linked to past experiences, often traumatic, that the conscious mind had buried. In dreams, especially nightmares, these buried memories can resurface, not always as literal replays, but as scenes charged with the same emotional weight. Consider a person who has experienced loss. In waking life, they may appear to be coping, but in dreams, they may find themselves in terrifying situations, trapped, abandoned, or grieving. These nightmares are not punishments. They are the mind's attempt to process pain, to bring hidden sorrow into awareness. Freud believed that healing required this confrontation. Only by bringing the unconscious into consciousness could we begin to understand ourselves. Nightmares also reveal the tension between the id, ego, and superego, the three parts of Freud's structural model of the psyche. The id is the source of primal drives, hunger, aggression, sexuality. The superego is the internalized voice of authority, morality, rules, judgment, and the ego mediates between them, trying to keep balance. Nightmares often occur when this balance fails. For example, a nightmare involving shame or punishment may come from the superego. It may reflect internal guilt or a fear of being judged. A dream of violence or chaos may come from the ed, raw impulses that the ego cannot fully suppress during sleep. In both cases, the nightmare is the psyche in conflict. It is a stage on which our inner divisions play out. Freud was especially fascinated by recurring nightmares. These are not just random events, but repeated messages. He believed that repetition in dreams pointed to something unresolved, The unconscious keeps returning to the same scene, the same fear, because the issue has not been integrated. It is as if the dream is saying, "Pay attention, there is something here you need to face." Symbolism is key in Freud's interpretation of nightmares. A house may represent the self. A locked room may signify a secret. Water may suggest emotion, and drowning may point to being overwhelmed. These symbols are not universal, though. They are personal. Freud encouraged free association as a method to decode dream symbols. By saying whatever comes to mind about a dream image, the dreamer can uncover its deeper meaning. For instance, someone may dream of their teeth falling out, a common nightmare. At first, it might seem meaningless, but when they begin to associate, they might recall anxiety about aging, fear of losing control, or worry about appearance. Freud believed that the meaning of a dream is not in the image itself, but in the emotional and psychological connections the dreamer brings to it. Nightmares involving death are particularly potent. Freud viewed death not just as an external event, but as a psychological symbol. To dream of dying, or of someone else's death, may reflect transformation, the end of a phase, or fear of change. But it can also express guilt or unresolved grief. These dreams are often intense because they tap into fundamental human concerns: loss, meaning, mortality. Sexual themes in nightmares, which Freud often emphasized, are frequently disguised. The dream may not appear sexual at all, but through analysis, the symbols and scenarios may point toward repressed desires or conflicts related to intimacy. Freud was criticized for placing too much emphasis on sexuality, but his point was broader: that many nightmares emerge from emotional energies that society teaches us to fear, hide, or deny. It's also important to understand that Freud saw nightmares as meaningful even when they didn't seem connected to waking life. Sometimes a dream feels nonsensical: monsters, shifting landscapes, impossible events. Yet Freud believed that even these elements are constructed by the mind, and therefore carry significance. The bizarre quality of nightmares may reflect the distortions necessary to allow unconscious material to emerge. Freud also explored the idea that some dreams, including nightmares, serve a protective function. This may seem paradoxical. How can something so disturbing be protective? But in Freud's view, the mind sometimes produces anxiety in dreams as a way to prevent deeper psychic breakdown. The nightmare becomes a kind of release valve, a way to express intense emotion in a symbolic form that the conscious mind can begin to process. This is why Freud did not believe in avoiding nightmares. Instead, he saw them as opportunities. They may be painful, but they are also honest. They show us what we have tried to forget. They remind us of what we need to heal, and in doing so, they offer a strange kind of hope. Because to dream, even to dream terribly, is to be alive. It is to possess a mind rich with meaning, full of voices, stories, wounds, and desires. And to have a nightmare is not a sign of weakness, but of depth. The unconscious is speaking. The question is, are we willing to listen? As we move deeper into Freud's understanding of nightmares, we begin to see them not as isolated events, but as part of a larger psychological landscape. Freud did not see nightmares as defects of the dreaming process, but as meaningful manifestations of internal dynamics. In fact, nightmares may be the most honest dreams we have. They strip away the filters. They bring to the surface what has been hidden for too long. This perspective invites us to shift the way we relate to our nightmares. Instead of fearing them or dismissing them, Freud encourages us to explore them. What are they trying to tell us? What message is hidden within the fear? These are not just abstract questions. They are tools of introspection. Nightmares can be a starting point for deep psychological insight. Consider the idea that a nightmare is a kind of disguised wish. This seems strange at first. How can fear, horror, or suffering be related to a wish? But Freud's dream theory includes the notion of wish fulfillment, that all dreams, even nightmares, express a desire. The key is to understand that the Wish may be unconscious, and it may be distorted by internal conflict. A nightmare, then, might reflect the tension between what we want and what we are afraid to admit. For example, someone might have a nightmare about losing control, falling from a height, screaming with no sound, or being paralyzed. On the surface, this is terrifying, but underneath, Freud might suggest, is a desire to release control, to let go of responsibility, or to express vulnerability. The nightmare becomes a dramatization of a conflict between freedom and restraint. Similarly, nightmares involving being trapped or cornered could reflect an unconscious desire to confront limits. The fear of confinement may mirror a real-life situation, an unsatisfying job, a toxic relationship, or internal repression. But it may also express the tension between the desire for safety and the longing for escape. In Freud's view, the nightmare does not create the conflict, it reveals it. Freud also believed that the content of nightmares can be shaped by day residues, the lingering thoughts, feelings, and impressions from waking life. A conflict at work, a painful memory, or even a casual remark can serve as the seed for a nightmare. The unconscious takes these fragments and weaves them into a symbolic story. This is why keeping a dream journal can be so powerful. By recording and reflecting on our dreams, we begin to notice patterns. We start to understand the language of our own unconscious. Nightmares often contain contradictions. A loved one may appear threatening. A safe place may become dangerous. Time and space may collapse. Freud saw these contradictions not as flaws, but as evidence of inner conflict. The dream compresses multiple meanings into a single image or event, a process he called condensation. It also displaces emotional significance from one object to another, a process called displacement. Understanding these mechanisms helps us decode the nightmare's true meaning. Let's imagine a recurring nightmare. Walking through a house that slowly becomes unfamiliar. The rooms grow darker, the walls close in, and you feel watched. Freud might interpret the house as the self. The transformation of the house could symbolize anxiety about change, fear of losing identity, or feelings of being overwhelmed by unconscious material. The watcher could represent the superego, observing and judging. In this way, the nightmare becomes a psychological map. Another common nightmare is being unable to move or speak. Freud associated this with feelings of powerlessness and repression. It may point to a time when the dreamer felt silenced, ignored, or emotionally paralyzed. The nightmare does not invent these feelings. It gives them form. It demands recognition. There is also a social dimension to nightmares. Freud believed that societal norms play a major role in shaping the content of our unconscious. What we are taught to fear, to repress, or to avoid becomes material for dreams. For instance, if a culture shames emotional expression, the unconscious may respond with dreams of breakdown, loss of control, or exposure. In this sense, nightmares are not just personal, they are cultural artifacts. This insight makes Freud's theory deeply relevant even today. In a world that often values productivity over introspection, strength over vulnerability, and distraction over depth, our nightmares may be the only part of the mind still insisting on honesty. They demand that we slow down, listen, and look inward. Freud's work also teaches us that interpretation is not about finding one fixed answer. A nightmare can mean different things to different people. Its symbols are not universal codes, but individual expressions. That's why Freud emphasized free association. The dreamer's own reflections, emotions, and memories are the key to understanding the dream. The analyst's role is to help uncover, not dictate, the meaning. Let's return to the idea of death in nightmares. Freud believed that death in dreams is rarely literal. More often, it signifies transformation, endings, or the death of the ego. In some cases, dreaming of one's own death might reflect a wish for escape, a desire to be reborn, or a confrontation with existential questions. Dreaming of another's death may express guilt, unresolved feelings, or the need to emotionally separate from that person. In all cases, the nightmare serves a psychological function. It brings the unspeakable into symbolic form. Freud also saw the dream as a space of regression, not in a negative sense, but as a return to earlier states of being. In sleep, we become less bound by logic and more open to fantasy. Nightmares may return us to childhood fears, to preverbal emotions, to early wounds. But this return can also be healing. By revisiting the past, the unconscious gives us a chance to reframe it. For example, a person who experienced abandonment in childhood may dream repeatedly of being left behind, lost, or ignored. These nightmares are painful, but they also offer the possibility of integration. As Freud argued, bringing the unconscious into consciousness is the beginning of freedom. To see the nightmare clearly is to reclaim a part of the self. Of course, not every nightmare needs to be analyzed. Freud acknowledged that some dreams may arise from simple causes: indigestion, noise, physical discomfort. But even these may interact with psychological content. The mind is rarely passive. It takes external stimuli and infuses them with meaning. What, then, is the value of nightmares? According to Freud, it lies in their power to illuminate. Nightmares strip away illusions. They show us what we fear, what we avoid, what we long for but cannot say aloud. They may be unpleasant, but they are also truthful. In this sense, they are not enemies. They are messengers. To dream is to engage with the unconscious. To have a nightmare is to stand at the threshold of insight. It is uncomfortable, yes, but it is also an invitation to explore the depths of your own mind, to face your shadows, and to emerge more whole. Freud never saw dreams as separate from waking life. He believed that the dream and the waking mind are part of a continuum. What we repress by day returns by night. What we fear in silence finds voice in dreams. This is not a weakness, it is the structure of the psyche. And it is through this structure that healing becomes possible. So the next time you wake from a nightmare, heart pounding and breath shallow, pause. Before you turn away, before you dismiss it as nonsense, ask yourself, what part of me is trying to speak? What truth have I avoided? What pain needs recognition? Because in the darkness of the nightmare, Freud found meaning, and in that meaning, he found hope. Not just for understanding dreams, but for understanding ourselves.